it's my pleasure to introduce Peter Gannon. He is VP of Business Partnerships from Within Three. So, with more than 19 years of diversified experience in the life sciences vertical, Peter has been involved in digital pharmaceutical communication since 1996. His leadership in strategic planning, revenue generation, and business partnering has established a strong and diverse client base for Within Three. His expertise and experience in working closely with organizations to develop new technologies proves invaluable to clients and partners as they adopt new solutions. His consultative demeanor and willingness to work collaboratively continually provides benefits to clients and partners old and new as Within Three's business grows and evolves. And with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Romy, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you to Precision for allowing me the opportunity to come and speak with you today. So I just want to do a sanity check. You can see my slides and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you again for the opportunity to come and speak with you. I've had the opportunity throughout today to come in and out of different presentations, and like in the live meetings of old, that affords you the opportunity to really get a sense of some of the themes that were discussed, and so hopefully everybody's been enjoying the different lenses into areas of virtual clinical trials, which can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people over the course of today, and I think one constant I noticed is that there are technologies that are really hard at work everywhere within the clinical world. Simple databases out to clinical trial management systems to ECRF forums and everything in between. And a multitude of partners that also are involved, whether it's CROs or scientific affairs agencies, even the sponsors and the patient advocacy groups, everybody kind of trying to accomplish different goals within the clinical development cycle of drug development, of compound development. And so it's just interesting to hear all the different things that are going on in different parts of in different areas and parts of the marketplace. So hopefully I'm going to shed a little bit of insight about a very particular lens that we've honed very specifically over the last few years. So just to give you a brief introduction, my name is Peter Gannon. Dr. Tada gave a lengthy description of who I am and what I do. I've been fortunate to be part of a company called Within Three for the last 10 years, which is a lifetime considering the company is only about 13 years old. And listening to Catherine's presentation, I wonder where we fit. I like to think of us as a disruptive technology, and I can certainly understand where in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology world where that word disruptive comes in, because anytime there's a place where people have the ability to express their opinion, when that's being discussed in a place where there's a product being discussed, whether it be a compound in development or a compound that's already been commercialized, there's cause for pause in the industry, and so we've been able to experience a lot of that over the course of the last 13 years or so, and as a result of that, develop a bit of expertise and develop a bit of insight relative to to how companies can adopt new technologies, how they can utilize new technologies, how they can really push the envelope with new technologies, and ultimately how that can benefit their business across the board, if they do it properly, and if they do it in accordance with all the rules and regulations within their organizations. But then certainly when you extrapolate that globally, there are things that you need to be cognizant of in different parts of the world, depending on whether you're engaging physicians or patients or payers or anybody within the drug development continuum. So just a little bit, this is today's agenda, but before I go into the teams and what we've seen from engagement and illustrate through that through some of the case studies, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about Within Three. So Within Three is a 13-year-old software as a service company, and over the course of the last 13 years, we've we've really kind of tried to engineer a solution set that is going to, if I can advance the slide, that is going to address very specific challenges within the life sciences industry. As we all probably know, there are areas within our industry where communication is expensive. It's complex. It's challenging. It's cumbersome, and time consuming, potentially resource draining. So, ideally, you have technology that can help facilitate that. It can help underpin that and support that. And in many ways, it can help address some of the challenges and problems associated with different communication scenarios across the drug development life cycle. And we've been able to do this successfully. As I'll illustrate that today, our technology is a bit different from maybe other virtual or digital technologies that you're familiar with. And in doing so, in creating a solution set like this, it's really been done to be scalable, to be sustainable, to be flexible, to be accommodating to different audience types. And if you do that successfully, you can create a new way of learning, and that way of learning and educating and sharing information can be used in concert with all the other ways that you're already using. Again, whether it's live meetings like we kind of miss and haven't been able to do for the last year or so, whether it's virtual live broadcasts like the one we're doing now, or whether it's mobile or anything else that's driven from a database, these different technology sets can work together ultimately to achieve the greater good. So what it is that we do is, we create private, secure, online regulatory compliant environments for companies large and small to be able to engage audiences large and small around very specific topics. So this can manifest itself. These can manifest themselves in a bunch of different ways, but most commonly they manifest themselves in forums that are being used to facilitate information exchange between a group of like-minded individuals. So let's take, for example, a group of investigators. If you want to get them together, right, you don't have the luxury right now of flying them to the Dallas Marriott for a 2-day investigator session. The idea of getting people online is not foreign. You can certainly hop on a Zoom, but how much can you really achieve in a 2 or 3 hour Zoom call? And would you get everybody's attention within that Zoom call for the period of time that you need it? And things that are iterative, wouldn't you need a place where things can, kind of be done, again and again, and maybe opened up for a period of a couple days or a couple weeks? So we create these environments in concert with our clients to really, enable them to accomplish their business goals, to accomplish communication goals, to be able to get insights and feedback from people that are around, the state, around the country, or around the globe, to have them participate from, from a standpoint of being a specialist in oncology in Japan, as well as here in the United States, and to be able to use technology to translate between different languages, to be able to use technology to enable people to have those conversations while they're on their laptop or on their phone. So again, we're really creating the environments that allow people to do virtual work. That's what that's what we set out to do, and ultimately what our clients have been able to do across the board is use these environments to engage, and certainly have been seeing that prove very, very useful, especially in the clinical setting. So beyond the technology, we really believe at its core, what our technology does is bridge people together. The goal of connecting people, whether that be investigators in a clinical trial, patients in a clinical trial, whether it be payers that are getting involved because clients are testing a theory around the development of a compound, whether it be caregivers that want to lend their input, or whether it be a combination of all those. It's really how technology can underpin the relationships that are forged, obviously, between people, and how people collaborate, across. Excuse me, my dog just left the room. How people use technology to collaborate across the globe to accomplish their business goals. So that's kind of our cornerstone for what we believe in. So this hypothesis, and we've proven it across the industry, initially in medical affairs and then in commercial, but we had a lot of clinical R&D folks that were interested in testing this hypothesis from a very scientific point of view, as usual. And so, a lot of those folks have come to be our largest advocates in the last 13 years. We've really established ourselves as a trusted partner in virtual communication for clinical teams. Teams using us in everything from consensus very early in the stages through the later stages of clinical development, with different audience types, in different companies. And you can see evidenced here by a couple of the logos that we work with, all different therapeutic areas. Different TAs often have different scenarios of development that they're involved in, and it might involve different types of physicians and specialists, throughout the development process. They might be involving patients and payers earlier in those discussions, dependent upon the therapeutic area and what have you. And so there's a flexibility in what we do that helps us work with these companies, because obviously they all have different interpretations of risk. They all have different variations on how comfortable they'll be with engagement scenarios relative to things early in their pipeline, middle of their pipeline, late in their pipeline, in medical affairs, and then throughout in commercialized products. So I took a slide here, around a kind of typical drug development scenario, and really smart software solutions, whether they be ours or others that are out there, can help teams work quicker, be a little bit more agile, be very confident in the decisions that they're making, and in many ways that can help expand how many people they need to engage around different things in these different channels that you see here. And ultimately, if they can be more accurate, they can make decisions faster. They can keep these development cycles on track with less hiccups. And ultimately, that will deliver more drugs to market, with ideally better results. Ultimately, achieving better results and medicine for people. But to kind of overlay some of the things that we see very commonly across the board relative to these different channels within clinical development. These are just a couple of examples, and I'm going to get deeper into some case studies a little bit later on. But, early in drug discovery, you have a lot of people around the table, and they're not always in the same room, right? There's different people in different parts of the world getting guidance on, a drug application is something that potentially could take weeks or months. But if you can, kind of streamline that and get people to participate in an online place where everything exists, you can end up seeing that things can happen a little bit more quicker, potentially with greater participation, and you'll be able to conflict resolve or gain consensus a little bit quicker, to help move you to your next stage. We see advisory committees of experts to advise on everything from concepts to ideas to different things within the preclinical phase all of the time. So constant kind of convening of clinical advisory teams to consult on a variety of different things, ranging all over the board relative to the different clinical objectives that you're trying to achieve. As you get into development itself, whether it be different phases of the study and things like that, you oftentimes start to see more audiences come into play. Companies now very, very, very much involving patients earlier in the input, phase, around everything from trial design to, kind of some of the endpoints that might be involved. And so, your ability to do that and do it in a streamlined fashion, I think, is very, very important as companies try and do more and more in terms of focused and personalized medicine, especially in the phases of clinical development. And then as you certainly go up to, getting your drug to market, you're constantly getting different feedback from whether it be the FDA or other groups, whether it's payers or anybody else that, is going to provide the need to get in touch with your experts, which, usually aren't all in-house, very, very quickly. So your ability to kind of convene these online discussions and arrive at a consensus again, or have a healthy debate, is really to your advantage. And so we've seen a lot of clients that, really have integrated this into the day in the life of a product development scenario, and it's used along that continuum so that they can make decisions faster and hopefully a little bit more accurately. So before the pandemic, we were running rampant with a lot of use cases that were repeating themselves. I mentioned protocol design, very much very popular across the platform. The idea of centrally locating a document that can be commented on and even augmented by multiple investigators that are contributing to that design was very, very popular. And then, those consensus discussions that I talked about, everything from guideline development all the way to endpoint consensus, all the way to the, inclusion criteria or anything that would come up in a typical, clinical development scenario was being discussed here. And operations themselves, kind of discussing the different things that are affecting studies on a regular basis, all the way out to, some of the recruitment challenges that you see out there. And being able to connect not only with the investigators, but the sites themselves, providing environments for the sites to be able to share best practices around what they were doing to increase their recruitment initiatives, I think was very, very attractive to, different companies. There's also this theory that, there's the competition for trial sites is so high. What can you wrap around that given trial to give that trial some added glow? And we've certainly heard from clients that like to have this this kind of advanced tech set around it, that there's a clinical trial community associated directly with that trial, whether it be for patients or for the sites themselves, is something that again is very attractive and has been used in the past. And, certainly this alluded to the fact of, some chiefs saying, do we need to get investigators together all the time? It's very expensive. It's time consuming. Certainly we love the interaction that we get with these individuals, but, is there a way for us to augment some of the things from a live meeting perspective with this digital, kind of online forum technology that we've come to trust? And then, the new needs arise, right? Last, what was it, March 10th? I remember well, I got off a business trip and I haven't been on one since. But, you've got canceled investigator meetings. You've got postponed advisory board meetings. You've got, a real lack of channels to connect sites globally, even regionally or locally. It's just been very, very challenging to have that level of connectivity. Internally at many pharma and biotech companies, there was a shift in clinical resources, towards, COVID-19 research for good reason. But that certainly left, some of these other, initiatives that were ongoing a little bit resource strapped. So, teams again challenged to kind of continue the path that they're on without as many resources or things at their disposal. And again, you can't have in-person activities going on with some of the quarantine rules and things of that sort that were going on. So there was the need for a workaround. So again, we did see folks kind of coming back to where they had found success before, but then adding in components to ensure that they were able to have touch points with different people that were involved in their clinical initiatives. Hybrid meetings or hybrid work is something we hear all the time. It simply means that for us, you have a combination of technologies. You have like a webcast component where people are online at the same time and they can exchange information in real time, and we can go back and forth and have that discussion. But then there's an asynchronous or overtime environment where that discussion can continue, right? Because if there's people involved in that discussion from around the world, they can come in a few hours later and add their 2 cents to an online discussion. And that information kind of just continues to flow and continues to go back and forth between the individuals that you've asked to come in and be a part of that discussion. By virtue of the fact that you're doing this on a flat technology surface, you can open that up to potentially more groups. You can include larger groups of people or even kind of more regionalized groups of people, which again, just, adds to the diversity of opinions, potentially adds to the inclusion of people maybe that don't get their voice heard. So ultimately you're forced to truly pressure test those ideas and make sure that you do have the consensus, or you're going to push to make sure that you do, based upon, the inclusion of more opinions. I mentioned before the patient feedback. I think that, again, we saw a lot more of that as the kind of pandemic rose up. I mentioned those virtual communities, certainly a demand for those, with resources and centralized kind of compliant places for that information sharing to take place. Taking those investigator meetings, which, had been, hey, it's going to be 3 days in this destination, and kind of keeping them on a rolling basis. So maybe it wasn't the length of 3 days that you would get, but you might take that and stretch that out over the course of a week or two, and have more frequent touch points with different groups of investigators. We saw people pivoting in that direction as well. And then, forcing companies to really look at the way that they're operationalized internally. Is there a way to, kind of streamline some of the, advisor contracting that sometimes can be a handicap in getting discussions to happen? So companies were taking a look at those and making improvements on them to basically, hopefully, speed up the way that they were working with folks. And as you saw this adoption increase, you also saw that, teams were then thinking ahead about, okay, this is working for us. We'd like to integrate this into our long-term strategies for clinical engagement. So how do we do that, right? And so you saw a lot of active discussion around how to do that. A willingness then to also address some of the internal processes maybe that had precluded that from happening in the past. When you have a system like this technology that can be used in clinical and medical affairs and even commercial, you then have kind of cross-enterprise pollination of information happening. So not only funding to make it happen, from a technology standpoint, but then also the idea that, okay, hey, we've actually had several discussions from a clinical standpoint. Can we share that with medical affairs? If medical affairs has shared that, is it possible to share some of that information with commercial, and vice versa? So you saw a lot of those roads kind of going back and forth and increasing the communication where, permissible, certainly within organizations. It made sense for that to happen. Certainly the appreciation of the things that go into this in terms to make virtual work happen, and some of the processes and things like that needed to be streamlined in order to make those things happen as well. So again, I think holistically, by experience, you certainly get the advantage that companies can start to accept this as something that they should be doing a little bit more regularly. And then, the more companies get familiar with something, certainly they usually want to streamline their SOPs and their processes around it. So again, I talked a little bit about processes and certainly cost savings. Those are usually things that very much appeal to procurement folks and sourcing folks within organizations. But when you think about some of the other kind of things that are represented here on this screen, they're very, very important. I mentioned diversity before, just in terms of, hey, investigators are important, the top KOLs are important, but as you get into the trenches and you start to spread out, especially in trial work, to different sites, your inclusion of different groups is really, really, really important. It can help you look at that, look at that information and those challenges a little bit differently, by including those maybe that don't always have their voice heard. You can certainly find additional ways to involve their opinions, and even new ways to get those opinions voiced. Being sustainable, right? When you step outside the normal channels, then how can we positively impact the world? Everything from, well, there's less flights being taken, right? So the green footprint becomes more important to companies that might be running hundreds of those meetings a year. And so being sustainable is important. Patient centric, right? You've been hearing that for the last 25 years, but you really need to involve patients in the design of your activities and in the trials themselves. So making sure that they do have a voice as early as the phase 2 trials and things of that sort. Connectivity across the globe for sure. Transcending kind of language barriers, and making it easy for people to view things in their own language, respond in their own language, and having technology do the work to translate that information back to somebody else's language. And if you're able to do this effectively, you can hopefully have an effect also on the work-life balance, which I'm sure everybody can relate to now, even if it's digital. We do need a break from the multi-hour back-to-back Zoom meetings. So if you can have an impact there, then that certainly is something that's probably appreciated as well. So take a pause for a second. Genuine learning comes through experience. Our friend John Dewey had the nice quote of saying, and that's just a way for us to kind of bridge into our case studies. But it really is about the experience in platforms like this that that give people the confidence to say, this is something that does work for us. It does work for our audiences, and helps us, helps us accomplish our objectives. So I wanted to give you kind of two very real case studies that I think can kind of spell out how this can help streamline things and create business value for companies, while being able to solve problems that exist in the real world. So I think this first example is from Huntington's disease, if I remember correctly. And they had a real challenge. They had to be able to engage a number of patients and a number of investigators in order to optimize the way that they were designing this particular study. And this was a phase 2 clinical trial protocol. They were, seeking the input to review and discuss that protocol design. They really needed to consider some of the logistical considerations for conducting this trial, and they had to be able to confirm the primary and secondary endpoints for this particular trial. So again, in the absence of technology, this might take a longer time to do, or in let's say some other technologies that aren't private or secure, or maybe they're only interstitial, that they allow you to, must be online at the same time. That might take longer to do, to coordinate those schedules. But if you have an environment that people can access and it's trusted and branded and private and secure, then people can go in and out of that when it's convenient for them. So the way that this program was structured is these 17 patients whose identities were blinded were dropped into a session and asked 30 questions over the course of 2 weeks. Similarly, for the second, 2 and 3, second and third session, 10 investigators were dropped into a session for, for 2 individual week sessions, including a time for them to, gain consensus at the end with a brief face-to-face, webcast touch point at the end. And they were able to optimize that study by going back and forth, considering kind of the one-to-one discussions that were had with the patients, and then the individual 1 week discussions that were had with each of the groups of investigators to better understand those logistical considerations that needed to take place. They also were able to understand, all the aspects of recruitment before finalizing that trial protocol, and they were able to validate the primary and secondary endpoints again. So they were able to streamline the way that they were able to get to the different things that we're trying to achieve by talking to the groups of patients and physicians. They were able to do it in a quicker fashion. They were able to spend less money and ultimately, get in touch with the people that they needed to get connected with in order to get the information that they needed. So this was a beneficial outcome for in rare disease to be able to structure a protocol that was going to work for the trial design and ultimately achieve their goals. Here's another case study example where in oncology, they were interested in gaining a bit of consensus on how to outline the new design for this particular clinical trial. In oncology, you're oftentimes dealing with scenarios that are not ideal for patients. In this particular one, the way that the trial was originally thought of, it was going to be an existing treatment, but this was going to be a combo treatment. And the combo would reduce the incidence of relapse and improve the quality of life, but not necessarily improve the life expectancy, which in this case, I think was a year or less from the time of diagnosis. So they really wanted to get a sense from the payer community on, on the effect of what this, where this might sit in formulary or coverage relative to, the endpoints that they had. So again, they opened up a session where people could come in and out of it, depending on their availability. There was 14 advisors from different global payer organizations. These were facilitated by 2 client, moderators. They kept these sessions open for 14 days. There was one-to-one discussions going on, as well as some group discussion. And again, it concluded with a group of or a single session where all of those advisors could come together. So again, by having those individual conversations combined with having those group conversations, they were able to gather considerations for evaluating this new treatment from the point of view of insurers. They were able to confirm the endpoints for this trial, and they were able to justify the pharmacoeconomic benefit and the viability of this new treatment. So again, these are just kind of 2 real real life case studies that I think, can illustrate how companies use this type of technology and when working in clinical settings to engage their advisors or their investigators or their patients to help them, accomplish their objectives. So I'll just leave with one more slide. These types of technologies help companies make faster, more confident decisions across the drug life cycle. I've illustrated a couple of use cases here in the R&D world. As we see many compounds that begin working with within three in their clinical phase, we'll carry that through medical and commercial. And only because that collaborative effort can help them accomplish their, some of the business goals that you see illustrated in the bullets under these headers. And so again, hopefully this has shed some light on how technologies can help shape, some of the things or help shape some of the solutions that can address some of the challenges that you'll continue to see in the clinical world as we progress. And I'd welcome the opportunity to answer any questions.
Wonderful.
Great. Well, thank you, Peter. That was really terrific. And I spoke with your colleagues just yesterday, and I thought that it was a terrific platform. And where one area where I thought is a good entry point is within pharma is medical affairs. They tend to be sort of the early adopters of these sorts of things, and then moving into clinical development and commercial.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Oftentimes we do get a call from medical affairs that has a need for an advisory board that they either have too short a runway to pull off or too short a budget to do, or maybe it got canceled because of COVID. But oftentimes that will lead to what else can we do? And that's why we see a lot of the clinical use cases that I illustrated today.
Perfect. So again, thank you very much.
So if anybody else is interested in connecting with Peter and his team, book meetings with our meeting scheduler platform, most importantly. And again, thank you so much, Peter, for your great presentation.
Great. Thank you.